Your hair is looking luscious, Rob.
40% done. That's it. I got 60% to go.
It looks great.
I'm going to ask you a question right away because I got to know. I'll wait till we go live in a second, but I am very curious about the question I'm going to ask you, just for the record.
Who is you, Rob or Ben Stein?
It's Ben. You're the one that I always want to ask. But on that note, I want to welcome everybody to the world according to that man, Benjamin Jeremy Stein. I want to thank everybody that's been downloading the podcast. Kudos and thank you for the great comments. I will take our comments over anybody's comments any day of the week. They are fantastic. They are fabulous. Of course, we're joined tonight by Rob Kendall from 93.1, the president of Conservative Talk Radio. Bam. And of course, former shoe salesman, former person that worked for the FTC, lawyer for the FTC, actor, writer, provocateur, saint, sinner, lover, husband, father, grandfather, statistician, mathematician, but of course, most importantly, Dr. Benjamin Jeremy Stein. How are you, sir?
I'm great. My stomach's a little upset from eating too much ice cream, but otherwise it's fine. I've decided that although I love ice cream like crazy, it doesn't always love me.
A lot of things you love don't always love you back.
That is for sure.
That is the lesson.
Sure. That is for sure.
Before we get to you, Rob, for those that don't know, his hair is looking great. Decided to get.
I would like to know what was wrong with his hair in the first place. It looked great to me from day one.
Well, it wasn't that it wasn't great. It just wasn't perfect. And Ben, if you can get hair for free, you take advantage of it.
Okay, so that's my question. So you got this from your radio station. You got a free plug. No problem. You got free plugs from the radio station. Were you at all nervous about this?
Only because I'd never been under anesthesia before. And they do anesthesia with it because they knock you out when they do the procedure. That's it. Everything else, no. But I was just nervous about the anesthesia.
What kind of anesthesia did you get, my friend?
Good stuff. I don't know what the name of it was. It was great. He said, count back from 30. I got to 29, and I was.
You're the exact opposite of Ben and I. Both Ben and I wouldn't be scared of the anesthetic. We would love the anesthetic. We'd be scared shitless about getting hair from somewhere else.
I was going to ask if you have any of it left over, but the ass didn't have it left over.
You know,
on that note, no, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say real quick. The guy who did my procedure used to be a doctor who delivered babies. Ooh. And so he was telling me about the difference between delivering babies versus doing hair transplants. So I felt pretty good by the time I got ready to go, because if you can bring a life into the world, hair transplants are super easy.
You had a doctor that literally switched ends. Okay, Ben Stein. So the topic tonight, first of all, I want everybody to prepare for the last 10 minutes of the show is where would you have wanted to be a fly on the wall? And I don't want it serious. I don't want it like, the Last Supper. I want fun things that you could think of that take our minds off of politics, of fun places. Like Ben's been to so many cool things. I know Rob has done some interesting things, but fly in the wall stuff. But first of all, I want to start with, sorry, Ben?
You have offended Rob.
But the first thing I want to talk about, Ben, is the dam is starting to break. You have Ilhan Omar making these horrific accusations, equating Israel and Hamas.
Wait. She's going a little farther than that.
Right. Well, she's gone way farther than that. I mean, the absolute anti-Semitism. And the squad members are defending her.
Screaming
anti-Semitism. And the squad members are defending them. Well, the establishment Democrats are like, we let the animals loose and we can't call them back. And there is a serious, and at a certain point, even the media can't cover this stuff up. And right now they're having they can't cover it up. It's out there.
Well, it's interesting thing. If you take in a person into your party who is distinctly unwell, filled with hatred, filled with a kind of pathological racism, and let her loose and say we love her and pat her on the back and say go for it, Elon, then you're going to have trouble, and it's so they're starting to have trouble. But I will tell you, it's a very reassuring sign that they are having trouble, because if the Democrats are all rallying around her and saying Heil Hitler, I'd be really, really scared. I would be really, really, really scared. I have to say the squad, the jihad squad, scares me plenty as it is. And if the Democrats were not trying to rein her in, and her colleagues, I would be really, really scared. I'm happy that the Democrats are showing some backbone about this.
What's comical is they're claiming racism is why they're going against her.
Claiming whose racism?
The Democrats are racist for going after Elon Omar.
But she is herself the most virulent racist currently operating on the planet. I mean, she is absolutely number one. She and her jihad squad people are the most racist people operating on the planet today.
Ben, how many times have I said stop being realistic? Stop living in reality when it comes to Democrats, because that reality is something Democrats truly like to ignore, Rob.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because you have to do coalition building to win. And the establishment always likes to be in charge. And so they're willing to accept the people on the fringes. You see it on the Democrat and Republican sides whatever they need to be in power. Then once they're in power, the problem is those people have loud voices. And in the case of the Democrat Party, which is in an ever quicker fashion, it seems like moving further and further to the left. Okay, well, these people helped give you power, but now you got to deal with them. So how do you combine the Joe Manchins of the world, who are actually interested in governing and staying in power, even if I don't agree with a lot of their governance, with the far radical left like AOC?
Well, yes, well, if you invite in to your party people who are clearly not right mentally in terms of personality disorders, you are going to have problems with them, and unless you at least try to isolate them. But it's a big job if you have a party member who has a very solid backing among certain groups. It's a very big job to keep her under control, and I'm afraid that Madame Omar has a very solid backing among certain groups. And I don't know how big the jihad squad is now. A short time ago, it was just 3 people. Now I think
it's 5 or 6.
Well, that's right. That's twice as many, roughly. So it's a scary thing that they're out there, and of course they get an astonishing amount of attention. The media, they have to really, really, really go some to get the media interested in them in a critical way. Critical race theory, yeah, we have some critical race theory. We have 5 or 6 totally crazy racists on the Democrat side who are making Hitler seem like he was respectable. I mean, these are people who would, without question in my mind, be up on the reviewing stand in Nuremberg with a Fuhrer shouting Heil Hitler. It would be right next to Martin Bormann, Rudolf Hess shouting Heil Hitler.
No, he's completely right, Rob. And they have a former presidential candidate as their leader.
Who is that?
Bernie Sanders.
But Bernie Sanders, I mean, Judah, I've been trying to explain this to you for a long time. He's not really a politician. He's a mentally ill person.
Ben, I know. I was saying he is their leader, and he gives them cover, Rob, for their anti-Semitism with being one of the most self-loathing Jews of a generation.
Well, we talked about this today on the air. So you always hear about, people want bipartisanship and they want both sides to work together. When you hear the sort of stuff that comes out of people like Ilhan Omar comparing America to Hamas, and look, that sort of radical enunciation from the far left is more common than it is rare these days. How are you supposed to work with those people? What common ground can you find with someone who compares America and all its goodness to Hamas?
Judah, since you are the one who follows the news minute by minute, in what areas did you say the U.S. and Hamas were the same?
Israel Israel.
Yeah. I thought, yeah, you keep saying, Rob, I love you dearly, but you keep saying she's saying the U.S. and Hamas are the same.
Well, I mean, what's the difference at this point? She would probably say, she might say the USA too. I mean, to her,
She would say the USA is worse than Hamas.
yeah, I mean,
She likes Hamas. She doesn't like the USA. This, to me, is what's so scary: is that we have people in the constitutionally elected representatives in the Congress who hate America, explicitly hate America, explicitly hate the Constitution, explicitly endorse racism. That's there, and many people in their party love them.
Yeah, I mean, Rob, it's this really, I don't even want to say fascinating, because when you say fascinating, it implies something good. It's absolutely frightening
Terrifying.
that they've allowed this thing to these animals out, and with no idea. I really don't think I don't know how they didn't see this coming. I mean, honest to God. And it really brings me up to the Republicans, right? That still think that the people that are still sitting there thinking people are going to come back to their party. It's almost the reverse that's going on now, right? You have these old GOP figures who think everybody's going to swing away from Trump. And you have these Democrats who are, it's just this weird thing that's going on.
Well, wait, could you finish that sentence? You have this. Okay, we have the Republicans, often rhinos, who think the party is going to completely repudiate Trump. That's not going to happen.
And Ben, you have a majority, and not a majority, a lot of the Democrats who believe in BLM, who are standing up for the squad. And I'm talking about, I don't know what the percentage is of the party, but it's a way bigger percentage than people that have abandoned Trump. That's for darn sure.
I want to go back to him. Judah, you and I talk on the phone quite frequently, and I have the great pleasure of your company on the phone and in person. Let's turn the clock back to the start. BLM has raked in a hell of a lot of money. What do they do with it?
They buy homes.
They're not spending anywhere near enough to absorb all the money they're spending on homes. They've taken in, as I understand it, tens of millions of dollars. They certainly have not spent tens of millions of dollars on real estate in Los Angeles. I have a good idea what real estate in Los Angeles costs. It's not that expensive. So
maybe they're building tunnels like Hamas does in Israel.
Seriously, what are they doing with the money? Because I thought that the draw was that if you give money to BLM, they will give the money to poor African-American people whose breadwinner has been killed by police violence. So far as I am able to detect by reading the newspapers, and they have not been able to find any trace of BLM doing that. So what is BLM doing with the money?
What do you think, Rob?
Well, I want to come back to something that I said earlier, because Ilhan Omar did compare the U.S. to Hamas. And look, this is from NBC News, who's certainly not going to be accused of being a conservative organization. Here's a quote from Representative Brad Schneider about it, equating the United States and Israel to Hamas and the Taliban is as offensive as it is misguided. Nancy Pelosi, House leadership, including Nancy Pelosi, issued a statement echoing the initial condemnation, saying, quote, drawing false equivalencies between democracies like the U.S. and Israel and groups that engage in terrorism like Hamas and the Taliban foments prejudice and undermines the progress towards a future of peace and security for all. So, I mean, she did do that. I mean, it doesn't really change.
God bless you, Rob, for bringing me up to speed on that. But I want to ask you, I'm sorry, I'm not getting this point across very well, I think. What did Representative Ilhan Omar say were the ways in which Israel and the U.S.
No, Ben, she didn't give examples. She did. That's the whole thing. They don't need examples. That's not what the left's about. They're about throwing out these, you're a racist. You're making the moral equivalence. If anybody in their right mind were to look at Israel and Hamas, and I'm talking about a lot of people on the left, Ben, who have decided that Hamas is now the darling of the party to defend. If any of them were to ever look Nobody ever looks, and a lot of people don't know this. So let me say this: Israel, for whatever, is the only place where Arabs could vote and sit on the parliament in that region, pretty much. It's the only place you could be gay. It's the only place you could women could drive.
Free medical care.
Free medical care. And compared to the rest of the region, I mean, compared to the rest of the world, for the most part, in most countries, they have more rights than in many other countries.
Then that brings me back again, Rob, my favorite person in that part of the world, to my question. When Ilhan Omar said the U.S. and Hamas are the same or similar, she must have made some specific comparison.
Yeah, Ben, I'm pulling it up right now, so give me just a second. But the point of what Judas is, I'm trying to find the exact quote because I don't want to misquote her, is that she was talking about great genocide or whatever that's been committed amongst countries, and she starts naming off people, and it's the U.S., it's Israel, it's Hamas. So she names all of these people in one group as though they're the same people, and the U.S. is not the same as Hamas.
And the Israel is even remotely the same as Hamas. I wonder if there's any kind of provision in the rules of the Congress for having a representative removed for clear signs of mental illness.
Usually they lose their positions, right? Republicans have taken away positions from Marjorie, what's her name? Marjorie Green.
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Marjorie Taylor Greene. They took it away from that guy from Maine or Iowa, Steve King, I think it was, Rob. So they have
Steve King.
Yeah, they have taken away positions for people. And Steve King, these people make Steve King look like he's got no opinion.
Moderate and kind-hearted. And he actually isn't a bad guy.
So I have the quote here, if I can read it real quick. This is what she tweeted on Monday. We have seen unthinkable atrocities committed by the U.S., Hamas, Israel, Afghanistan, and the Taliban. So she managed to lump us in with not just Hamas, but Afghanistan and the Taliban. Like there's some moral equivalency between the United States and the Taliban.
Well, as I say, she's a wicked and I'm sorry to say an unwell person. I mean, it's Karl Marx himself, a quite well-known mentally ill person, said it's amazing how much of the world's work each day is done by people who are not well, and he meant not well in the head.
And, by the way, Bren bigs up another point. So let's get back to the point. And if you just tuned in, you are listening to The World According to That Man, Benjamin Jeremy Stein. I am reading your comments. We thank you for your comments. We welcome you all, and thank you for keep on downloading that podcast. Don't forget to do it, and tell your friend about it. Steal their phone, download it. But welcome back to The World According to Ben Stein with Rob Kendall and Ben Stein. Ben raised a good question. Where is all the money going that was given to Black Lives Matter? It's a very good question. So now I will give you this since we don't know the answer. Twitter recently, everybody has released the tax returns almost illegally, Rob, right? Of like Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, I believe Bill Gates had his tax returns released. And Twitter, but I can guarantee you this, if anybody were to ask this question on Twitter or Facebook or any social media platform or release their accounting books, Ben, they would be banned and it would not be allowed to be brought up.
Wait, you mean to tell me? Now I have a friend, a close friend, who has a Twitter account. You mean if she were photographing me and I said, by the way, I'd be very curious to know what these wonderful people at Black Lives Matter are doing with the money that's being contributed to them, that would get her and me banned from Twitter?
No, what I'm saying is if you released the documents, if you released their tax forms or their filings, I am sure that Google and Facebook and everybody would do everything in the world, Rob, to suppress the actual story.
Wow. So, why would, just out of curiosity, they would do that just because anything that Black people do is okay?
Well, they would do that to protect what they think is the little bell of the ball, that you can't break the dam.
Let me back up. A very, very close relative of mine recently shared with me that she and her husband, very well-to-do people, gave money to Black Lives Matter. I was so stunned I almost drove off the road. She was talking about it while I was in my car. And I asked her, what do you think they do with the money? And she didn't know. But I don't see any sign that it's going anywhere useful. I mean, I've told you a million times, and I'll tell you a million and one. And first time, when my wife and I were at Yale, we worked very hard raising money for the Black Panther parties. What we were told was a free breakfast program, which is to say there were these little children up in the hill section of New Haven who were not getting a nourishing breakfast. And we raised enough money for thousands of them to get a free, nourishing breakfast every morning. It turned out the money was going for drugs, and these people were drug dealers and murderers. Okay, that's unfortunate, very deeply unfortunate and horrible, especially for the people they tortured to death and so forth. But question, are we ever going to find out anything similar about Black Lives Matter? What are they doing with the money? I assume they're doing something wonderful and useful. What is it?
I know you're being sarcastic, Rob, but to get back to it, Rob, it'll never be released.
Right. So Ben is obviously super qualified, way more qualified than I am on this because he understands, one, the economy better than I do. He's an economist, makes sense. And he's testified in front of Congress and various other legal entities. So Ben, I've never understood why people are so mad at the rich people taking every deduction possible, right? They always act like, whether it's Trump or Romney or whoever, that somebody doesn't review their tax returns every year. The IRS totally clamps down on Donald Trump or Jeff Bezos or Mark Cuban or whoever, right? They totally scrutinize these tax returns and are looking for a mistake that they made.
Yeah, but will they do that to BLM? And what has BLM reached a stage of being so exalted among the nations here in America that they literally cannot be questioned even?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I just pulled up a story, and it was Candace Owens, the
we
black
love her
who we love, and a few other people who were questioning where the money was going, and immediately groups jump in to say, no, that's not, that's factually incorrect, and so it's pretty much like the last 5 years. You're never going to get the real story. There's never going to be investigations, as we discussed this the other night. I went to CNN. You know, sometimes you do have to read what's going on in other places and other outlets. And I shared this with somebody. I couldn't find one investigative piece. I couldn't find one piece that they actually did on their own, Rob, where it was a CNN exclusive, where it was a CNN journalist.
So this is, again, a follow-up with the question for Ben, because he understands the economy.
Nobody understands it, but I know a teeny little bit about it.
Well, under Obama, there was a huge crackdown on nonprofits and their tax returns because they wanted to come after these conservative groups. And so I guess I would be naive to think that as BLM, I guess it's technically a nonprofit, would be receiving the same sort of crackdown that, I don't know, the Tea Party did in, say, 2014.
No, they're not going to get that because all life is political. And when I was at law school at Yale, there was a carved in stone above the main entrance on Wall Street, although it had nothing to do with the New York Wall Street. There was this quote: "The life of the law is not logic, but experience." And the life of the law is that politically popular left-wing groups do not get scrutinized; they get away with bloody murder.
So just so you know, I just want to switch quickly since we're all like Googling and looking at our phones. The squad members came out in defense saying enough with the anti-blackness and Islamophobia.
And so, what does that mean? What does that even mean? Anti-blackness. Black comes back to blend again.
And she's Somalian. I'm not even sure what that's considered. And
that's as black can be.
Right. And Ben, but you got to remember they have every safeguard in there, because remember, as I described to you, the definition of intersectionality, and that is what they constantly play on. We're the victims. So essentially victims could scream whatever they want from the rooftops and never have to pay for what they're screaming. And all because if you come after them with actual facts, it doesn't matter. You're a racist. you're an Islamophobist. You're anything if you go after any of these groups. So they will continue to get donations. They will continue to not have to be audited. And that's just the way it is, Rob, because Republicans, and I got to say this, Ben, Trump for 4 years was under assault. I haven't seen the House members, the members of the House, do anything to make the left uncomfortable.
It's absolutely true. As far as I can tell, now there may be things going on that I don't know about. I have a very close, very smart friend in Washington named Nolan Rappaport who follows immigration very, very closely. And I think he was able to send me recently some data about Republicans urging investigations about the total failure of border control.
But that's my point. Urging. I want to actually see. I heard, no offense to your friend Lindsey Graham, but Ben, we heard him on Hannity for 4 years urging for Hunter Biden and for all these inquiries to the position that he held, that he could have brought them up on, Rob. But where are the Republicans? It's fascinating.
So I played this. I stole a clip from our show the other night and played it on the air on the Mock and Rob show the other day, which is that great clip we were talking about fairness in the media. And it's that clip of Ben talking about Pontius Pilate with Jesus and finally throwing his hands up and going, "What is justice?" and moving on.
No, what is truth?
What is truth? I'm sorry. And moving on. And I just thought that was such a great clip talking about how there really is no truth anymore. It's whatever you make it out to be. And you're seeing it. We've seen it with the Hunter Biden stuff and the total lack of reporting on his ridiculously disgusting language he used over and over and over again, the lack of reporting. You see it on the lack of any sort of inquisitivity on what's going on the border, the basic, other than in a random act of journalism from NBC, a free pass on Kamala Harris. And you basically see it on how do these BLM leaders end up with 4 homes, and yet there's no proof whatsoever of what they've done to actually help African Americans. Nobody cares.
Nobody cares. They thought of an incredibly clever slogan. It's meaningless in terms of reality. I went to this person who's extremely close to me, no, except for my wife, nobody closer. And I said, are you aware that of violent deaths of African-American men, that above 98% are caused by other African-American or Latino men. 2% or less are caused by white people, including police. She was not aware of it, didn't care, and still said Black Lives Matter, and she's going to wear that banner. Well, I think Black Lives Matter too. I was recently in Silver Spring, Maryland, where I grew up. I went to the elementary school where I went to elementary school. It was great, great, great school. The only Black person there the whole time I was there was the janitor, Willie, because it was racially segregated by law. We all loved Willie, and we were very, very happy when the segregation was over and Black people could go there. Now, all of that's gone bye-bye. All that's gone bye-bye. All the hope that somehow Black and white people would get along wonderfully, gone bye-bye. I assume they still do in some places. I'm sure there's some wonderful colleges and universities where Black and white people get along well. There's a great, 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 great college in the Berkshires called Williams College. I have no doubt whatsoever that everybody there gets along very, very well. But in general, this whole idea we had that we're going to let down the burden, the barriers, and say Black and white people get together, love each other as neighbors. It didn't happen. And instead, we got lunatics like Ilhan Omar stirring up racial hatred wherever possible.
Ben, I will say this. I think whites now don't like each other more possibly in our country because we've become so politically tribal in ways in anybody's wildest dreams they couldn't have seen, that I don't think anymore. I agree with you what you're saying about the race thing, but it's not just race anymore. It's white. It's if you're a D in front of your name and you're an R in front of your name, you can't be in the same room. You can't get along. You can't be. It's in ways I never, Rob, thought is humanly possible.
Well, what I'm worried about is whether there's going to be a J after my name for Jewish, and that's coming.
before your name.
No, Jay, very funny. Jay, no, for Jewish. When I was a child growing up in Washington, D.C., the newspapers, when there was a crime, would list whether the person apprehended or arrested was black or white, and it would say B, C for colored, or W for white.
Rob, go ahead.
That's coming.
Well, the crazy thing about someone like Ilhan Omar is she is the epitome of what America is, right? It's someone who immigrated to this country, has achieved that much success, and now runs the country, and yet she has immense hatred for the country. She should be somebody that we should put up, or somebody who should put herself up and go, look, this is why America's so great. This is why it's such a wonderful place. You can immigrate here, you can be accepted, you can be put up on a pedestal, you can run the government, no matter what background you come from. And yet, for some reason, this sort of person who should love this country more than life itself believes America is inherently evil, and I don't get it.
Well, have you ever heard schizophrenia? No, I'm not kidding. I mean, I'm not. Well, actually, I'm a doctor, but I think these people are not right in the head. I mean, I don't think it's a matter of politics. I think they're not right in the head.
I think you're completely right. If you just think you are listening to the world according to Ben Stein, but one of my favorite titles of a story of the day was on Breitbart when it said Jeffrey Toobin returns to CNN job, and it says not whacked for Zoom whack job. And I think that is one of the funniest things I've seen as a title of a piece. And Ben, listen, we're not judging people and their perversions, what people do.
I don't think that's a perversion. You think that's a perversion?
Masturbating on the Zoom chat while others could see you that don't know what you're doing. It's a little bizarre.
I would say it's unusual, but a perversion in the sense that it would be in the DSM for mental illness. Oh, well, it might be.
Yeah, Ben, I think that might be in the. Ben, take aside anything we discussed prior to the show or anything that. But when somebody doesn't know you're doing something, you're a lawyer that's constantly berating everybody else as not being as morally or ethically as good as you. When you've spent 4 years blasting President Trump, and you get caught, doing whatever on a Zoom call, and CNN allows him back on the job.
Who was he on the Zoom call with?
I believe it was people from the New York. What is it? Either the New Yorker or one of those, and they were not.
Doesn't he work for the New Yorker?
Yes, that's who he did it with, and it wasn't like a lot of people that if you saw who they were, it wasn't like all of a sudden he was watching the Zoom call going, "Oh wow, this is quite the turn on." But it just goes to show you again. You're talking about this mental illness. There is a network with sheer absolute mental illness. I don't know how he got his job back. I don't even know how. This is the double standard, right? We saw it through the Clinton years, right? You saw organizations like NOW and all those organizations never defending the women. You saw, and all of a sudden you have this guy that does this. Where are the women screaming "Me Too"? Where are the women? I'm just saying, I don't agree with the Me Too movement, but at least, Ben, be consistent.
But they're not, of course, they're not consistent. They're not honest. They have no style, and they're bad people. I respectfully point out there have been some incredibly wonderful Democrats in the past, but the party now, unfortunately, operates largely as an outdoor refuge for mental illness victims. So it's sad at that point. And I'm sure there are still many very, very, very fine Democrats, very, very fine. I don't consider myself a particularly fine person. I'm sure there are tens of millions of Democrats who are much finer than I am. But I think for someone to be masturbating on the internet in front of the New Yorker, that's great. That's great. By the way, I'll tell you one interesting thing. When I was a child, my parents subscribed.
When you were what?
A child. My parents subscribed to the New Yorker, and I think it was either 15 or 20 cents an issue. And I picked one up in my doctor's office either yesterday or the day before, and it's $8 an issue.
I honest to God, I don't know if I've ever read the New Yorker in my life, Rob, but and I hate talking about double standards. And somebody brought up turn your camera off. I really think part of his thing was keeping the camera on. It's like when they say a person that rapes doesn't, it's not a sexual act, it's an act of power. This is like these people seeing how, like people like Wiener, how far they could spread their power. And even if they do get caught, how much could they get away with?
Who is Wiener?
Anthony Weiner.
Oh.
So two things. One, you treat the camera on a group call like you do a microphone on the radio. You assume it's always on at all times and everyone is watching you. That's just like basic etiquette. Two, I'm really curious because Ben's been in Hollywood, he's been in Washington. Who's the biggest weirdo you ever worked with, Ben? You had to work with some crazy weirdos, right?
You're asking a very, very good question, but I would have to say a person in Hollywood that was one of the nicest people I ever met. I loved him a lot. He did a hell of a lot for my family. He gave my wife a very, very good job at Paramount Pictures. And he was an incredibly wonderful guy, but a very strange guy. If they took too long at the gate, opening a gate on the studio lot, he would just drive through it and smash it to pieces with his very fancy car, and then have the studio get him another car. He would routinely use the casting couch, and he would get girls over to his house. He had a very nice house in Bel Air, and he would, as he would say, I think his phrase was break them in or something like that, and did some interesting things with them. But you know what? He was a weirdo. There's no doubt about it. He was a weirdo, but he was one of the nicest guys I ever met.
But here's the thing: you got to remember Ben, because he did a lot of he did a lot of one-offs, or aside from obviously when Ben Stein's Money, which was on forever, and movies like The Mask and The Mask 2, which he was on it for a bunch. What about Jim Carrey?
He was strange, but he's talked so little when we were on the set that it would be hard to say how strange he was. But you're right. That's a pretty good one. That's a darn good one. That's a darn good one.
And Rob, I have a great one that accidentally happened, and I don't know if Ben wants to talk about it, but it was somebody that we met at a Bob's Big Boy that you worked in the same that you worked at that you were in this. Should I share that story?
Sure. I mean, I can only say it brings a tear to my eyes because I love Bob's Big Boy so much. They don't seem to be around anymore, but there you are. But go ahead.
Okay, so we were both.
Is Bob's Big Boy like Frisch's Big Boy? Is that a hamburger joint?
Yeah, it used to be a national place. It's very famous. It's iconic. It's got the Big Boy outside.
Okay, right. Okay, yep.
And there's a Bob's Big Boy on the way to the desert, and I was sitting there as Ben was in the bathroom, and this waiter who really looked like the Big Boy walked up to me and said, "You're never going to believe, it's like a Ferris Bueller's reunion in here." And I was like, "Okay, what are you talking about?" I thought he was maybe challenged. And he said, "There's the principal." And so I go to the bathroom and I say, "Hey, Ben, did you ever work with the principal?" And he said, "No." And so they end up, Ben goes outside talking to the principal, Mr. Rooney, Jeffrey Jones is his name. And we end up making dinner plans Ben did with Jeffrey Jones. And as we're driving, I had vaguely remembered that Jeffrey Jones had some issues. And let's just say it wasn't one issue. He had 3 felonies for child stuff. But I got to tell you, as Ben said, he couldn't be nicer. The guy was he was exceptionally a nice guy. And as I'm like Wikipediaing him, it's getting worse as you go down the list of stuff that he's done. But we had dinner with him, and that's what I love about Ben Stein. He treated him with the utmost. He treated him with it was a very nice dinner, Ben. Right?
Well, you're very kind. And by the way, the place we took him to dinner is gone too. That's heart-rending too, as my wife would say.
Yeah. So some strange times. But Rob, that's a good question. I like your fascination with this stuff. That was And I'll think of stuff because Ben's told me a lot of stories of the weird, of the occult. But I want
to real quick. Could I just say that's so fascinating to me that you were both such prominent characters on such a wonderful movie, and yet you guys had never met before.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's true. It's very true. It is fascinating, and I don't know what to say. But he was a very, very much more talented actor than I am, and he did a great job. And boy, I miss those days a lot, a really, really lot. I mean, it's funny. I got an email from Pat Buchanan a couple of about a few hours ago. Really,
I love how so matter of factly. This is the great part about Ben's world. Most people aren't sitting at home now going, a couple hours ago, Pat Buchanan emailed me. But go ahead, Ben.
More like a day ago. And he said, "Boy, those '60s, those are some times." And I thought, yeah, they sure were. Wow, were they ever? And then you at the beginning, as we were warming up, Rob, you said the '70s. What were the '70s like? God, the '70s were so great. And I mean, unless you were in Vietnam, and thank God Mr. Nixon bought almost all the American.
Or the '60s.
Or the '60s. But the '70s, oh my God, were we having a good time?
So let's back up. Was your experiences of the '60s the same as Pat Buchanan's?
No, but we're all having a damn good time. And of course, Pat was putting Nixon back on the map, and I was, what should I say? I was giving young people intense courses in their constitutional rights.
And what's interesting is somebody brought up, and we've brought this up on the show before, that serial killers could be a nice person. It could be nice. And Ben met one of the kindest, nicest serial killers.
Well, he actually was not as kind and nice as he could have been, but thank God he didn't kill me or anyone I knew. But he scared me plenty. I'll tell you that. When I walked my dog, this was Edmund Emil Kemper. When I walked my dog at night up at UC Santa Cruz, I was packing heat, and I was ready to use it.
So somebody asked the question. This is actually a really good question. Do you think anybody that's worked with you would say you're one of the weirdest people you've worked with?
Yes. I think so, probably. But I try to be very disciplined.
No, weird doesn't mean you're bad. It could mean interesting. It encompasses it, right? I mean, I would imagine a lot of people have said, "Damn, that Ben Stein. That was one hell of an interesting person I met today."
Well, I think for being a Republican on Hollywood sets, especially in the comedy workshop of Norman Lear, they must have thought I was pretty weird. I remember one guy in particular, very successful network sitcom producer, when he read a book, the first draft of a book I had written about the political leanings of people in Hollywood. He came down the hall to where I was standing, actually talking to Norman Lear, and he threw down the manuscript and said, "Traitor," to me. And I said, "Why?" And he said something like, "Because you told the truth." And I thought that was kind of funny. But anyway.
Hey, Judah, that's such an interesting thing, because people ask me all the time, because obviously we play the clips with Ben. I reference things that we've discussed here on the show, on the Mock and Rob show. And people ask me all the time, what's been like in person? And I tell them what just a hilarious, funny, quick-witted guy is. But the characters Ben played were, always they think of Ferris Bueller, planes, trains, and automobiles. And so it's so fascinating how people view someone just from the few scenes they see them in the movie. And then they're like, "That's amazing. I had no idea he was like that."
I would humbly say the two things that sort of depict Ben the most, that you get the best of Ben, is Win Ben Stein's Money combined with The Clear Eyes.
Because wow, was that fun? Except when they did the one where they dropped me into a bed in the water. That was awful.
Right, but other than that, Ben, you got the brilliance on Win Ben Stein's Money and a little sarcasm, but and then you got the fun of the Clear Eyes commercials, of his sense of humor. So that I think is the perfect combo of two things, how you would describe Ben Stein.
I would say I should have answered your query. Jimmy Kimmel is incredibly interesting to work with him. He and I are on different sides of the fence politically, very much so, but he is she's a stunningly intelligent, smart, funny guy, and a very nice guy. And his cousin Sal, an amazingly impressive guy, just an incredibly impressive guy. Sal is just a genius. I mean, just a real genius.
So apparently somebody in the chat, I got to say this, met John Wayne Gacy for half an hour, and they couldn't have been kinder. And then they said they went crazy. I got to be honest, that's an interesting one to say, because he's probably he's even creepier than Big Ed Kemper. I got to be honest.
Kemper, if you were not a girl hitchhiking or else's mother, he was okay.
Hey, Ben, can I, and I hope this isn't too personal of a question, but like with the Clear Eyes thing, do they come to you and go, we're looking for a spokesman, you'd be great? Like, how does that happen? How does that come about?
They came to my agent and they said, would you like to do it? And I think she said, does it pay in money? And instead of being given a potato or a chicken. And so we agreed to do it. I did it for about 15 or 16 years, and I really enjoyed it. And I was heartbroken when they canceled. I think they first of all replaced it with an African-American woman, but that didn't work well. And so soon they stopped having ads and all. But they are still on the shelves, and it's a great product, if I may say so.
Do they let you write your own check when you become as famous and associated with the product?
No, I was extremely happy with what I was being paid, but certainly by no means writing my own check. But I mean, I was happy with what I was being paid.
Did you mean write your own dialogue, Rob?
No, I just meant like when you become as associated with the product, like you can't lose Ben Stein because you think of him when you think of Clear Eyes, and I just wonder how those negotiations go.
Well, they didn't think that. They didn't think I was all that important, or else they would not let me go.
Ben, tell them about Hollywood. Everybody's replaceable. Everybody's replaceable.
Everybody's replaceable. I think Michael Eisner said, especially for women who think that they're irreplaceable, there are 10 new ones coming in on the bus or on the plane every day. And
if you look, nobody ever thought Bill O'Reilly was replaceable. And then Bill O'Reilly didn't think he was replaceable. And I can say, I didn't think he'd be replaceable, but he set up such a foundation at that network that a nutless monkey could have come in and had sort of the success that Bill O'Reilly and Roger Ailes had built up. That's how strong. And it was Clear Eye's biggest mistake. I mean, you were obviously synonymous with it. I don't get why companies do that when they took the Snapple lady away, you're talking about pennies compared to these companies. And to take away that face is just, is a ludicrous thing. And I'm not just saying that, but if you just tuned in, you are listening to The World According to Ben Stein. We have steered away from politics for the moment, getting an inside picture into the life of Ben Stein, as Rob Kendall is extremely curious and extremely a great interviewer and questioner.
And great hair, and his unbelievably great hair.
With the lush locks. What's the name of the place again, Rob?
WeGrowHairIndie.com.
So before and I want to welcome everybody back to The World According to Ben Stein. Before we get to that thing of where would you want to be a fly in the wall, and I thank everybody for staying with us as we veered off topics of politics a little bit. You constantly talk about the governor of Indiana being a rhino, right? And just terrible. So, and then you brought up Joe Manchin before. I'm just curious. Would you rather have Manchin as your governor or this guy as your governor?
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt, Manchin, because in Indiana we have Republican supermajorities. The problem is they're always Billy Badass when there's someone to fight with, but there's no one to fight with, and they're completely unwilling to take on this governor because he's of the same party. So if you had in a weird way, I say this all the time on the air, if you had a Democrat in power, the supermajorities in the legislature would be so much better. And there's such a low threshold for the governor in terms of its 50+1 for a veto override in the state of Indiana. You'd have way better, more conservative policy if you had a Democrat in charge of the state as governor.
Maybe you should run for governor as a Democrat.
I'm needed here.
Okay. Well, you're needed. We need you very much.
Somebody wants a before picture, Rob. Okay, so that's what somebody asked for in the chat room. So, Rob, if you have a before picture, can you please get it? Rob used to do the show before he got the plugs. I didn't even know about the plugs until
he looked great. He still looked good. And my wife is insanely in love with him. Thinks he's really great, and we're also we think you look great no matter what you do with your hair.
Okay, so before I'm going to tell you because this is a really funny story. I share it with one of my closest friends. This is a true story. One day, Rob, he called me up and he said, "Can you do me a favor? Can you pick me up at the doctor's?" And I thought it was this emergency. So I get there and his hair is all, his whole head is bandaged up. And I'm like, "Oh my God, are you okay? Like, what happened to you? Did you have a concussion?" He goes, "If I tell you, you have to swear you're not going to tell anybody." So I go, "Oh my God, I swear, whatever it is." He goes, "I had hair replacement. I had hair plugs." I go, "Okay, I'm not." So I go to his house, I drop him off, and he goes to do something. I'm smoking. I go to smoke a cigarette, and I call up my friend. I go, "You're never going to believe who just got hair plugs." And I said to my friend, "Please don't tell him." So an hour later, the guy that got hair plugs called me and goes, "Did you tell anybody?" And I go, "Oh man." I go, "Yeah, I told him." I didn't know he was interested too in getting hair plugs. And but on that note, I want to get to where would you have wanted to be a fly in the wall? And I guess in Rob's case, a lot of it has to do. Rob gets to be a fly in Ben's world and Ben's life, and it's so much fun watching that dynamic and listening to this on the show. But I'll start it with this, and I want to hear from the fans because I don't want it to be political. In my case, Ben and I are huge fans of the Traveling Wilburys, which is one of the greatest super groups bands of all time. It was George Harrison, George Harrison, Roy Orbison, Tom Petty, Dylan, and Jeff Lynne from ELO. And I would have loved to have sat in on those recording sessions. I would have loved to have just sat there and watched those geniuses work.
I would have loved to have seen the first time Bob Dylan played in Greenwich Village and seen how the audience responded to him. Even now, Bob Dylan lives near me in Malibu. I've never seen him. So I would still like to see him. He just turned 80 years old. The guy is such a genius. It's unbelievable. I was talking to my psychiatrist this afternoon. I have a psychiatrist. And I used the phrase breadcrumb sins. And I said, that's a great phrase, isn't it? It's from a Bob Dylan song. And he turned out to be a huge Bob Dylan fan. He looked it up on his phone immediately. And we got the song within like 10 seconds. Rob, Judah, do you know what song it is? Great Bob Dylan song, The Gates of Eden. And that is what it was like in the 70s. Before you started the show, you, Rob Kendall, of the great Hair Kendalls, asked me what it was like in the 70s. And it was as if they had opened up the gates of Eden. It was great. Now, not if you were in Vietnam, that's for sure. But when I was a student, it was great.
Ben, I'm sure you will agree with this, Ben, that The Free Will in Bob Dylan is one of the 5 greatest albums of all time.
You bet. You're not kidding. Oh, you're not kidding.
So, Rob, going with my thing, I would have, of course, loved to be in the room with when they went to the moon beforehand. Going, I would have been love to listen to that conversation between Neil Armstrong and the rest of the astronauts going, "We're doing it, boys." But Rob, what about you? Where would you have liked to fly in?
So, look, this is just a Homer thing. And one of the cool things about me about being on the show is I grew up loving Ben Stein. Like, I loved Ben Stein's Money. Comedy Central, I was 12, 13, 14. I would watch that show. I would think how great it was. Ferris Bueller.
Thank you.
Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, one of my favorite movies ever. I think it's so cool when super famous people inspire people who become famous later. And you hear the story from famous people about how they were inspired. And I just think the story that Ben tells about when he met Elvis. I mean, that's just such a damn cool story about this guy that would inspire so many people, meets this other guy who inspired so many people.
He inspired the whole world. I mean, this guy was a god. And in fact, it's interesting. just yesterday, I think I was talking to somebody in this household. I forget who. We have so many people walking in and out of this household all the time. At times, like a bus station. But someone said, "Who was the handsomest singer there ever was?" And I said, "By far, Elvis Presley." And she said, "Absolutely no question about it. Every woman in the world would want to have sex with Elvis Presley." And I thought, wow, I got to meet him in person, and have a meal, basically have a meal with him. Elvis Presley.
So somebody wrote that is amazing. I think that's the greatest story. And but somebody wrote they would have loved to have been in the garage of Hewlett Packard's garage. Rock Breath. I think that's absolutely a brilliant one. But Ben, where would you have wanted to be a fly on the wall?
I would have wanted to be a fly on the wall when Ben Bradley and Bob Woodward decided to make up Watergate and to make up that story and kick the greatest peacemaker that has ever been in the White House out of a job and basically start a conspiracy to ruin the governance of the nation and laugh about it. I would love
non-political, Ben, a fun one.
A fun one. I would say as a fun one, well, the most fun I have ever had in my life was when I was teaching at American University in Washington, D.C. in 1972. And I had the largest class in the history of American University, 360 students. They loved me. When I walked into the room, they would stand and applaud and stomp their feet. And we just had the greatest time you've ever seen in your life. And if I could have kept that job for the rest of my life, I would have done it. It was incredible, incredible. Being a teacher, if you do it the way I did it, was the absolutely best job in the world. And even to have been a fly on the wall observing me would have been great. Those were the days, my friend. We thought they'd never end. Oh my God, were those days great.
So here's my question to you. What the fuck happened? When did this country lose its sense of humor, its sense of fun, its sense of exploration? When did we become so darn serious?
I think it had a lot to do with Watergate. I think it had to do with the urgent need of the media to whip up a false story to get a genuine American hero out of office and to humiliate him and change the political party and change the result of the 1972 election, in which Nixon won the greatest landslide of all time. And the media was able to steal it away from him over a completely imaginary thing. Everything was suddenly turned askew. There was no reality basis anymore. It was all just what the party said was important. The inner party, it became like life in the inner party in 1984, a very, very unstable, unsociable, insecure place to be. Very bad.
I mean, the 80s were fun, Ben, for a lot of people.
No, nothing like the 70s.
No. I'm saying, but if you notice, it got worse from decade to decade together. Yeah, so you're probably right. Because the 80s were fun for a lot of people. Sadly, you had a virus that stopped people from having fun. The 90s were dominated, Rob, by grunge music, which was extremely, obviously not fun. It was suicidal and drugicidal and all of that stuff. The 2000s, and every decade we've gotten to this point where it's like you're not allowed to enjoy your life as the way they preach to you.
We say in AA, I will tell you this. I think either Bob or Bill, one of the big boys in AA, said, "Life is short, and I absolutely insist on enjoying it."
Somebody wrote a great one. Who is it? Josh Richardson. Sorry if we go 2 minutes over. Said they would love to been a fly on the wall, and so would I at the table reading for planes, trains, and automobiles. I would have given my left nut. Which is sort of a quote from that. One of my favorite scenes is when they're sleeping on the plane, and John Candy just opens his eyes to Steve Martin, or at some point he says, $2 in my left nut, we're not going to land. We're not going to land. So that would have been a dream of mine.
That scene where you're going the wrong way is my favorite scene in any movie ever. That is so well done.
It's interesting. One of the great plays in American literature is Death of a Salesman. It's basically the same story, only nowhere near as good as Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which is, as my wife, the greatest human being on the planet, says, was heart-rendering. It was not just funny; it was heart-rendering.
So I have to ask you a question. Since you knew John Hughes and you loved some of his movies, did you ever ask him these questions? Like, were you ever like, John, how the hell did you come up with Planes, Trains, and Automobiles? Like, how?
No, I never did. I just said, you're wonderful, you're a genius, and I said, what can we do to get more people to think like we do? Because he was a very, very avid conservative. I mean, he really meant it. He would send me incredibly long emails, incredibly long. Like each one was a volume about what was going wrong with America and how we needed to have a much, much, much more conservative, reactionary government. And he took it very, very seriously.
And somebody wrote they want to be a fly on Nancy Pelosi's wall. Why? She might get undressed in that room. God bless you if that's the room you want to be a fly in. He might have been joking. But I think we had a little levity tonight. I think Thursday nights, as you're getting ready for the weekend, you should have a little. We're supposed to have fun. We're allowed to have fun. We've gotten into the mind, and Rob's gotten to ask his childhood hero a ton of questions. Rob, let me ask you this: did you ever think you'd be doing this?
This is one of the best things I get to do each week. Like, I love it when you ask me to do this because, look, Ben is such an iconic character. And it's like my whole life, I can plot Ben Stein being a part of it. When I was super young, it's Planes, Trains, and Automobiles and Ferris Bueller. When I was in my teens, it was When Ben Stein's Money. As I got older, it was seeing Ben on Fox Business. Like my whole life, I can associate Ben Stein with part of it.
Well, God bless you, sir. I hope it'll go on for a while longer. God bless you, sir. My blood pressure is still excellent, sir.
And one of my favorite things would be, I would be watching Fox Business. Ben would be on there. Sometimes it would be with Wayne Rogers. And my grandmother would walk in and go, listen to that Wayne Rogers, Rob. He's a millionaire.
God rest his soul. He got taken too. But I just want to, Ben, what's your favorite scene from Planes, Trains?
The scene where John Candy is leading them in the theme song from some TV show.
From the Flintstones. From the Flintstones.
Yeah, it's just hilarious.
Well, because it was started with Steve Martin.
Yeah, it was started with Steve Martin singing a wonderful sentimental American songbook movie, a song, and nobody knew it.
What was it? Three Coins in a Fountain.
3 Coins in a Fountain. Yeah.
Right. And then he does the Flintstones, and everybody on the bus knows it. It's really great.
Rob, what's your favorite scene? And I'll end with my favorite scene.
Oh, it's absolutely You're Going the Wrong Way. When he goes, oh, he's drunk. How would he know where we're going?
my favorite scene was after they finally bonded and the car burned down and they got drunk at the motel and they backed into the motel and they get pulled over and Michael McKean is the officer and Michael McKean says to John Candy, do you know how fast you were going? And he's like, well, the speedometer sort of is burned. And he goes, you were going 75. And John Candy's like, I'm paraphrasing. He's like, okay, I could see that. And he says to him, are there any working gauges on this vehicle? And John Candy says, no. But oddly enough, the radio is working perfectly. That was my favorite scene in the movie, and I encourage everybody, if you're going, whatever you're going through,
be prepared. It's sad.
It's beautiful. It's life.
And, Ben, before we let you go, I have to ask you this Planes, Trains, and Automobiles question. Maybe you don't know it. At some point, John Candy randomly ends up with a black eye in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and it's never explained. Do you know how?
I don't know it happened. I don't know what happened, but I will tell you the movie was cut very considerably in the editing, so something probably happened. And the editor just took it out.
Do you know what book he was reading in the airport when he was talking to?
What?
The Canadian Mounted.
The Canadian Mounted. He was reading like an erotic book at the airport, and it's just that whole movie, it's the perfect movie. It's absolutely the perfect movie that everybody deserved Oscars for it. I mean, that you're in it is just an incredible, as Rob said, and I've often said, you are our Gump. You're the genius Gump. For the past 50 years, you've been through and been in places, and it's just remarkable. And I
You're
want to
very,
thank
very kind, and I am humbly grateful.
and I want to thank everybody that's been listening tonight, all the participation. We hope you offered you an hour of a little seriousness, but also a little bit of fun, because we can't forget to enjoy our lives. And no matter how much they tell us we're not supposed to enjoy our lives, screw them. We're going to do it. I bet everybody's going to watch Planes, Trains, and Automobiles this weekend. I know I am. And yes, everybody's got a scene. Edie McClure,
Oh my gosh, she's so wonderful.
I mean, my God,
so wonderful.
That airplane scene, the car rental
Car
scene.
rental, she's so great. It's unbelievable.
It's just, there's too many scenes. It's just one of those things, and all put together, you have one of the most brilliant movies. And I got to say, the night he died, Ben was on CNN, and I'll never forget that interview. And where he said, it was the death of a salesman of our generation, or better than death of a salesman. And and if you haven't seen Bueller Reunited or Reunited Apart, it was during COVID. They did they brought the Ferris cast back together, some of them, with Matthew Broderick and Ben and Alan Ruck and Jennifer Grey. And it was really cool to watch, because they asked what made John Hughes so special to Alan Ruck, and he kept on deferring to Ben. And it was so cool, the reverence that Alan Ruck, who played Cameron, had for Ben. He was like looking at him the whole time for the spirituality of John Hughes. And Ben just summed up John Hughes so well. He was all about love in his movies. And it's the thread that we need to get back to. It's love. And on that note, I want to thank everybody. Rob, tell people where they can find you every day from 9 to noon.
WIBC.com, the Mock and Rob Show, 93.1 WIBC. Bam.
Bam. And of course, you can find Ben at spectator.org. If you can throw a few shekels their way, they could always use a few extra donations. It's one of the oldest and best papers or online stuff still around. You could also find them at Newsmax, and of course on Parler at Ben Stein. Ben, sing us out. It should be the Flintstones. King.
I don't know. I said, I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses, and the joy we share.
Okay, Flintstones. Meet the Flintstones. They're the modern Stone Age family.
All right. God bless you. God bless you. My wife liked what I was singing.
Wilma, have a great night.